this 22nd of September, 2020. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Ahlquist,
Present.
Mr. Minshaw, present. Mr. McGlade,
Present.
Mr. LaFurla,
Present.
Mr. Arthur,
Here.
Ms. Hudak,
Here.
Mr. Kazaya.
Present. As you are able, please rise with me to observe a moment of silence. Please join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have a motion to approve our agenda?
So move.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, the motion to approve our agenda is before us. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. And our agenda has been approved. Before us now is the approval of previous meetings. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes of the workshop and workshop meeting of September 8th, 2020.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we have a resolution before us to approve the minutes of the workshop and the work session of September 8th. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Same sign. And our motion has been approved. Before us now is a public participation. This is an opportunity for our community members to address the board concerning board items, or for that matter, any item of concern. I've been instructed that we do have a recorded response to the board, and we'll go from there. Okay. Can we start that back over, please?
I regret speaking to you at this point, but I appreciate your flexibility because I'm fine. I was exposed and I had a negative rapid response test and I feel great, but I do understand the need for me to stay away from this meeting in person. As president of CBEA, it is my privilege and my responsibility to share information and ideas from members. I need to share information with you now. Thank you for listening to the voices of teachers in our district. First, we want to extend a thank you to our administration for their hard work and cooperation to work out some of the challenges from the hybrid academy structures of teaching. The acknowledgement of and compensation for the additional workload virtual academy teachers face is appreciated. Opening school in 2020 has been challenging, and when there were complications, the district has been open to work with CBEA toward a common goal of finding equitable solutions. For example, when it became apparent that virtual academy students were being assigned to non-virtual academy teachers, and those teachers weren't getting compensated, the district worked together as a team to set that right. And now, those teachers are getting a portion of the stipend as compensation for the athletic challenge that we're teaching virtual academy. I am confident that if other issues arise surrounding virtual academy, we'll be able to work together to find collaborative solutions for compromise. We also always appreciate being part of the conversation. CBEA is encouraged by the efforts for training the Labor Management Task Force. We know when we work together, we can solve problems for the common good. Another example of this collaboration happened with the appendix to the Return to Learn manual. There is now an option for teachers who have to quarantine but are not sick to work from home. I am an example of the success of this option. Teachers did not want to use their sick leave days when they're not sick, and that message was heard at the district level. The HR department, led by Jerry Melbourne, creatively and strategically developed and implemented this option. Some things that we still have to think about though for next semester, might be to separate the virtual academy from the hybrid model. So virtual academy teachers have only virtual academy students, and hybrid teachers have no virtual academy students. So the only remote students hybrid teachers would have would be due to a temporary quarantine of somebody due to the COVID. And when the parents decided to move their students from hybrid to fully remote, which is what's happening, well, those students would either be put in virtual academy or hybrid, and then they would have to stick to it. So we look forward to talking with the administration to work this out and possibly make any change for second semester. Another area where it is beneficial for teachers to collaborate with the administration is technology. The district has made some big ticket purchases in technology. There, the owl cameras cost $1,000 each. I don't know if that's true. I don't know how much one of those cameras cost or what it costs us to pay for them, but I bet you school board members know because it's part of the budget. What I do know is technology should be an asset to a teacher. Technology should not be a hindrance or obstacle for teachers to clear so they can be effective teachers. A lot of teachers have reached out to me to share their differing views on technology. And they have very different requirements for using technology. Some elementary teachers are required to record their classes all day, every day, and then post those videos to their classrooms, supposedly for students who are absent. Sometimes what is actually happening is parents look at those videos and pick them apart in a hurtful way on a Facebook page. So we need to ask, is using the technology this way a benefit to the teacher, to the student? Maybe having a prepared lesson, pre-recorded, posted would be better. But then you have to ask, when would the teacher have time to make those videos? Thank you again for your willingness to listen to the voices of teachers in Castle Bluffs. I have sent each of you an email containing 4 personal letters from teachers describing circumstances and challenges in their classrooms. Please take the time to read each one so you can have a clear picture of what is going on in classrooms with TV. Thank you for your time.
Okay, is there any other individual who wishes to address the board at this time? Seeing no one moving to the podium, we'll move forward with our superintendent's report. Dr. Murillo,
Thank you, Mr.
take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kozar. And tonight, we look forward to celebrating some of our staff members. I'm going to ask Ms. Ostrowski to join me at the podium, or to come to the podium, and I'll join her in a few minutes. But first, I really want to kind of set the stage. And we know how difficult the transition was when we closed our building and preparing to open our building. We know the challenges that we had with technology, our facilities, and also with feeding our students. And so tonight, we want to honor those departments. So Ms. Ostrowski?
Yes, and good evening.
Good evening.
Are you all looking at your signs that says, please speak directly into the microphone? I just pulled mine down to my height. Well, it's my pleasure tonight to just share a few highlights of the work that has been completed since March 17th, really, and in advance of that, as we knew that the COVID was in our community. And all of the work that they have done since in our return to operations and a successful start to the school year now 4 weeks in. So I'd like to start first with the nutrition department. If Miss Lisa Stewart would join us up front. She was in the hallway a second ago. And I'd like to share that, did you know that during the time when we were closed this spring due to COVID, the nutrition services department, the excellent excellent staff served more than 100,000 meals. Add to that another 100,000 meals during the summer. That's 200,000 meals to our students and their families during this difficult time. And that in of itself is wonderful. But think about the challenges that a department, Dr. Merle, I'll give you this, that a department that counts on the food supply chain to provide the necessary nutritious, nutrient-filled meals that they're required to do under the USDA. Couldn't think of it. And they were creative and they were tenacious about getting the product so that we could feed our families. Not only those daily meals during the COVID and the summer, but also during the school year, as students have been working in the virtual academy and on off days, her staff and their department makes it possible for students to have meals on those days that they're at home. And for that, we would like to congratulate Lisa and her team, and Dr. Murillo. The plaque reads,
Special recognition to our department for outstanding life.
And we also have representatives tonight from our facilities maintenance and custodial services departments. And I'll read just a little bit about them. They have not only made it possible for us to, I'm not reading, I'm just talking. During the time before we left for the closure, they stepped up at every building level and at the district level to make sure that we had the sanitizing and cleaning supplies in place and making sure that our schools were safe while we were still in. When we closed and as they prepared for a return, which didn't happen, and then throughout the summer for this new school year, again, making sure our return to operations plan was spot on by having equipment, innovative equipment, meaning we recognized a need for something in a lunchroom, for example, and they built that, designed it, built it, installed it, so that all of our students who were in a lunchroom could eat with a barrier. Not only that, but one that could be rolled up and thrown away. That, in combination with supplying all of the drinking fountains that were water bottle fillers, all the sanitizing stations, all of the new dryers and towel dispensers. I mean, all of the equipment that was needed to start successfully in more of a hands-free environment. Plus, their absolute new learning around new technology to keep our schools clean. And for that, Dr. Murillo, the plaque is to be presented, and we'll have Mr. Martin, Travis Martin, and your staff come forward. And Mr. Martin said he would like to introduce his staff and tell just a little bit more. So I'll welcome him to do that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Murillo. It's a pleasure and an honor to be recognized here tonight. But I'd be remiss if I didn't announce some of the staff that we have here with us tonight. You know, a plan is just a plan without the talent, ability, and dedication to pull it off and make it a reality. And these guys are the boots on the ground that make everything a reality. So with me tonight is Aaron Rain, Assistant Facilities Director. Aaron. We have Raymond Chase in the back there, your custodial supervisor. And we have Mike Henley representing the Facilities and Maintenance Department. Mike was integral in building some of the things that we put out, the barriers, doing the painting, installation of the hand dryers, or the automatic paper towel dispensers and all of the sanitizing stations. And then we had one custodial representative we invited tonight, but unfortunately had a family emergency. And that was Mr. Paul May, head custodian from Hoover Elementary. Paul was integral in pulling all the things off for the kids to come back to school, as well as just finished his third fire marshal visit, and for the third straight year, 0 deficiencies. So, excellent. Thank you.
I just want to brag on them a little bit. I mean, with Lisa's staff, I couldn't pull up to a building that she didn't have it staffed and the food wasn't ready. And the preparation that Lisa did with the nutrition staff was second to none, and how she thought about opening. The one thing that I was so appreciative of our facility staff was they would hear what I was looking for. They knew we had a budget, and they would almost just create a room for me to walk in and say, is this acceptable? Would this work? And then when we wanted dividers like you all have there, and we knew the cost, and we knew what we had been received in the CARE Act dollars, Raymond stepped up and said that, or Aaron, that in their facilities department, they could create those for us at, like, how much were they? How much did they cost when you built the small?
With everything that we can, the wooden ones were actually like $6.
Yeah, and what you have sitting here is almost $50. So being able to really look at being able to protect our students and put them in was remarkable. And I appreciate the work that you did in taking the lead and building all of that and getting everything in place. I always do a luncheon with the facility staff and nutrition staff each year, and because of COVID this year, we didn't come together. But I was telling the guys in the back, I haven't forgotten you, because I so appreciate the work. And Travis hit the ground running this year, coming from the hospital into our area and opening up a big school district under the pandemic. I know sometimes he felt the heat of me asking all the time what was going on, but he stood and he just continued to drive his team, and they did a really great job. So thank you so much. I know we don't say it enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
One more. Okay.
All right. Mr. John Stile and his technology department are the next group that we would like to recognize, and John will introduce his team. But there's a few points that I want to make. One is that during closure, they served an average of 65 customers daily, and for the remainder of that school year. They have prepared and installed 550 OWL cameras. When they were asked to provide pre-K through first grade devices for all students, they processed and got prepared 1,500 older used Chromebooks for them to use. They also rebuilt the entire network to include new safety, security, and reliable connectivity, so important during these times. And the task took over 1,000 man-hours. That's dedication. In addition, they prepared Kern Middle School for re-entry by installing all the new display units, the security cameras, and all the robust wireless systems that were necessary. And then the one thing I'd like to share is they really find a way to make possible the impossible with their ingenuity and determination. And for that, we salute them this evening. Dr. Murillo?
There you go. And you'll introduce your team.
It's truly amazing to get to come to work with a team that is so dedicated and so willing to give of themselves, and ultimately they do this to serve the students. To my left here is John McGreevy. He oversees our systems team and our network team. And then we have Lisa Spidell. She oversees our user support and our help desk. And then we have Ryan Sinclair and Beth Adams. They are our help desk team. They really do drive our department.
So if you remember when John took over for Dave, John recreated kind of his work chart. And I think that really made the difference for us being able to meet the needs of what we've had. And I have been at Canesville meeting with Mr. Barnett and seeing families come up to the help desk site, the drive-through. And I went outside because I saw a gentleman and I said, have you been helped or served? And he said, yes, they know I'm here. I'm waiting for my turn. And for the gentleman to know that he had called, he had made his appointment, they were coming in, he wasn't just standing there waiting, they had acknowledged him. And it's just a lot of great customer service coming out of our technology department, which I'm really, really proud of. Thank you all. Thank you. All right, Dave, will you join us for a quick picture?
Gather up here for a photo, please, and then we'll get facility, and we'll also get Lisa.
Put our leader in the middle. Come on, John. Get on the sides of you. Ready? Come this way, maybe? Yeah, just a little bit, be perfect. Perfect. Oh, we're all hiding behind you.
All right, we'll take 2 or 3.
Should we take our masks off?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we'll be left.
Don't, nobody breathe.
Thank you again. Thank you for coming.
Travis, you're your team? Big group that gets that. All right, Miss Lisa.
I thought they said froyo, there was photos, and I'm a little bit too excited. I was down for froyo.
You would.
Okay. Oh, guys.
Okay.
And that completes our report.
Thank you very much.
We'll move forward then with our student achievement.
Yes, thank you. I was just checking on our sound to make sure it's still moving. At this time, I look forward to Dr. Vorthman's presentation this evening. He is going to present our fall 2020 MAP results. As you know, the last time that we took our assessment was back in February, I believe, end of January, right? And so this evening, we will get a snapshot look at how our students are doing since the pandemic hit last year. Dr. Vorthman, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Murillo. Good evening, board members. It's my privilege tonight to bring us back to student achievement and looking at our district goals and the progress that we're making toward making sure that all students achieve at high levels. So tonight we're going to provide the interim look at our fall 2020 MAP data in both mathematics and reading. Before I start tonight, I want to take a minute to thank all the folks who helped make MAP testing successful. And this was a year certainly like none other that we had experienced before, especially when we thought about trying to do a standardized assessment in a hybrid model with students in a virtual academy. But I can tell you that everyone stepped up to the plate and made it possible. From our building leaders who developed schedules and timelines to make sure that they met the test completion, to our teachers who were flexible and continued to work with students to make sure that we got them tested, to our students who tried their very best despite the circumstances to make sure that they could show us what they had learned over the past year, to our parents who encouraged their students to do their best, brought their children into our schools or into ESC to test if they were a student that was in virtual academy, to our technology team who made sure that we had the connectivity necessary to make sure that our students could utilize a computer adapted assessment. And finally to Dr. Marty Shudak, who's also joining me tonight, who led the entire initiative from scheduling off-site to making sure that we had boots on the ground in buildings, to going out and working with individual classrooms, to testing kids remotely at 8 o'clock at night. He did it all and put all this assessment data together in just 2 short days. And so my gratitude to him for his continued commitment to our school district. So without further ado, I want to shed a little bit of light on the circumstances under which we thought we were going into our first our test post COVID-19 closure. And if you remember back to where we kind of left off last year, we were looking at really 3 key targets around our number one goal of increasing student achievement. And we set these goals 4 years ago around increasing the percentage of students that are scoring in those top 3 categories, or average, and high, at 80%. And by 2021, we want to be able to hit that target. And we made great progress on target number 2 over the past 2 years, that we increased our target to 60% from 50 of the students who are meeting their individual growth targets. And then lastly, we want all of our students to show some growth between testing periods. That's kind of the context that we're operating in. However, if you listen to any of the media reports and news reports over the past 6 weeks, I think you could agree with me that there was a lot of predictions about what we would see in terms of learning loss from COVID-19. All the way from predictions of students losing 2+ years due to the COVID-19 pandemic, to the need to really rehabilitate certain subgroups or most vulnerable students, that we could have several years to make up within an individual school year. And so that was kind of the worst case scenario that we were prepping for. And I know at a previous meeting, I think it was Mr. Arthur had asked me, well, what do you anticipate? What's going to happen? And I answered him, honestly, I really don't know. I did not know what to expect. But I can tell you, when we talk about data tonight, we're going to be talking about averages. And averages allow us to generalize across a large group of students. So when we talk about average achievement of the school district, we're looking at highs and lows and mediums in between, but trying to get a generalized view of how did we do in general, knowing that there are some kids that are going to need a lot of extra supports. And there are some kids who aren't going to need very much support at all. And there's going to be a whole bunch of kids in the middle who need us to keep doing what we do best, and that's teaching and learning. So I want to paint that picture tonight because I'm going to share with you some data that in the Council Bluffs Community School District, the sky did not fall in COVID-19. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit tonight about math and reading, and we'll start tonight with mathematics. So we did a lot of comparative work looking at the fall of 2019 and how kids did, and compared it to the fall of 2020. Because we wanted to see, did we have a good comparison to be able to make some judgments on? Could we compare it to something that was normal versus something that was abnormal? So what you're seeing right here is the percentage of proficiency improvement that happened from the fall of 2019 to the fall of 2020. So that takes into account approximately 6 months of learning loss or time that students were away from teachers from March through August. It also takes into account about 6 months of learning that they had from August and through the middle of March. So when we look at mathematics, on average across grades K through 11, we only lost less than 1% of proficiency. That's pretty remarkable to see that really we did not see these huge losses. But we do need to drill down a little bit deeper. So we want to look at individual grade levels to see if there were areas in which we made some gains or we made less gains. Now I tell you that we only lost about 0.8, and that percentage is based on students in grades K through 8. And the reason I'm providing that information generically on K through 8 is because we have confidence that we tested enough students in grades K through 8. All of the buildings in grades K through 8 tested about 90% of their students. We still have some testing going on in our high schools. We have large high schools where in a hybrid model, during a 2-week testing window, they only see their students face-to-face 4 days out of 2 weeks. So they have a lot of tests that have not taken place yet. So we're tonight putting a box around the data in our high schools, not because we don't think our kids in high schools are achieving. We think they are. But we don't have all of the complete data to be able to say with certainty that the data is 100% accurate. And so as we get additional tests in this week, we'll provide another update to the board in Friday notes about what the final growth was for our high school students. So I'm going to talk generally about K-8 in terms of student achievement, but you'll see some high school data up here as well. So one of the things you'll notice first about this is this bar right here represents our kindergarten. And if you remember last year, Dr. Matthews provided some information about the gold assessment in preschool. And what she reiterated over and over again was, we are really exceeding local and state benchmarks. Our kids are outperforming the region and the state. And that held up this year as well. Those students who were coming into us into this year's kindergarten were our highest performing of all of our grade levels that came from preschool. And so that's a really good thing to have. You will notice that we do see a dip in elementary. We believe that when we looked at all of the data in math and reading across all of our grade levels, the students that suffered the most during the closure were our students in elementary, especially our students in our early grades. There are so many foundational skills that they're learning, whether it's learning to read or learning concepts about mathematics, that are taught in those early grades before they start applying those skills to deeper learning, that there certainly are some gaps, and you're going to see those manifested throughout the presentation tonight. Absolutely. It's just like riding a bike, and I'm going to point out a couple things here tonight. So if you look at like second grade and third grade, those skills that those students have learned, they haven't forgotten them. They're just rusty and fragile. So it'd be like if you haven't ridden a bike for a year and you went and tried to ride the bike again, it would take you a few times before you remembered how to balance, how to coordinate your hands with your feet, how to pedal in sequence. The same thing is true for our kids, especially at those early grade levels where they really have not had enough opportunities to practice repeatedly over and over again so that is solid in their memory. This is the same chart that I just showed you, but I wanted to superimpose on it what did growth look like, proficiency look like from 2018 to 2019. So we had a reference to compare it to. So the teal line that you see across there is the proficiency levels from 2018 to 2019. And you'll notice that we are pretty consistent across the upper elementary. We see some pretty big spikes in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, which is why we're a little concerned about the data, not having everybody tested, that could be somewhat of an abnormality. We think that, we're pretty certain that our high schools are going to show achievement gains. We just don't know how big they're going to be right now. And so that's why that is caution. But if you notice the green line at our early elementary, there's a gap between where the kids achieved in 2018-19 and where they achieved in 2019-20, which tells us that those kids in elementary really did suffer some learning loss over those closed 6 months. To take it a step deeper, we also wanted to look at how much change had taken place in actual cohorts. So kids who were in first grade last year and are in second grade this year, and vice versa. You'll see on the bottom is each one of our grade levels, starting with first grade on the left, all the way up to 11th grade on the right, and the district average all the way at the far right. And this shows how much they either increased as a cohort in terms of proficiency or decreased as a cohort in terms of proficiency. So once again, what you notice is our elementaries, especially our students in third and fourth grade, or second and third grade this year, they decreased the most. They lost the most ground compared to their previous year. Middle school stayed somewhat flat. Sixth grade was down, but then seventh and eighth grade were up, which is what we typically see. And then our high schools dramatically increased, which is why, once again, we want to wait until we get all of the testing data to make some generalizations about high school. So this next slide is about looking at growth. How many of our students met their individual growth targets during the last school year? So from the fall of 2019 all the way through the fall of 20, what percentage met their growth targets? And while we seem to stay somewhat flat in terms of proficiency, remember, we were at -0.8, which is about 1%, our growth took a huge hit. And so what we're seeing is on the blue line there, the teal line, that's where growth was for percentage of students meeting their growth targets in 2018-19. That's what we would have expected to see, something similar to that this year. But you'll notice what we saw was really a gap between those two things. So what we're seeing is that while some students are staying proficient, they are not growing nearly as fast as they were growing. Growth has slowed way down during the pandemic, during the closure. You'll notice that there's an inconsistency between, at the bottom, grade second grade, third grade, and fourth grade. And remember, as students transition from, we're looking at data that's a year old and 2 years old, we're looking at that transition between the second K2 test and the 2-5 test. And I think I pointed out many times that we see a dip in that second and third grade and then a bounce. And you'll see that that's the same thing that happened there with the data. Next, I want to turn our attention to the achievement gap. And this is probably where we were the most concerned. I know I was very concerned that our most vulnerable students would lose the most during the closure, those students who needed additional supports. And so what we did here is we looked at you'll see there on the bottom, there are 2 bars for every grade level. So the yellow bar represents 2019, the fall of 2019, and the percentage of students, the average RIT score of those students in that grade level. The purple bar is the average RIT score this year for students in a grade level. And remember, a RIT score is this continuous range of scores that goes basically from about 120 up to 240. And what we should see is this nice, gentle progression upwards from grade level to grade level. So this shows our average score of students who are not in a subgroup. So this chart, for example, shows poverty. The bars represent the average RIT score of students who are not in poverty. Each one of those dots represents the average RIT score of a student who is in poverty. Now what I want you to look at is how much distance there is between that dot and the top of the bar. That is our achievement gap. That's how much we have between the students who are not identified in a subgroup and students who are identified in a subgroup. And what you'll notice is, even in spite of the pandemic, we are very consistent from grade level to grade level and from test to test for students who are in the low SES subgroup. There's very little distance between them as we go up through the grades. And that's what we want to see. We want to see that gap narrow so that there is no difference between the students who are in a subgroup and not in a subgroup. You'll see the same thing take place in ELL. So you'll notice that as they go up, the gap stays about the same through each of the grade levels. What you will notice is that there's a little bit more distance between the EL subgroup and the non-EL subgroup, especially when we get to secondary schools. And that most generally is attributed to a small number of students who qualify for EL services once they get to high school. In fact, we have to be a little bit careful about those data in those grade levels because they could be groups of smaller than 10 students, which we try not to generalize once we get into small n size like that. But that could be partially attributed to that gap. And then lastly, I wanted to look at students with IEPs and receive special education services. And what you'll notice is the story is the same. COVID-19 really did not exacerbate an achievement gap any wider than it already was for students with disabilities. You'll see that when we look at from the yellow bar to the purple bar, in some cases, we even went up during the pandemic. So once again, we have to be careful about extrapolating data in small data sets, but generally speaking, for students in subgroups, we did not see a disproportionate or a statistically significant difference between their performance and students who were not in the subgroup. So next we're going to talk about reading. And reading is very similar to the story in math. The only difference is we actually saw an improvement of 1.3% in terms of students scoring at those top 3 levels in grades K through 8. One thing I would want to note is when we were talking about MAP data last year, we were typically bringing you percentages that were 3 plus. And you'll remember I said I'm always nervous when I see increases that are 3% plus. What I want to see is nice, steady incremental gains so we don't have spikes, peaks, and valleys. We'd really like to see increases of about 1 to 1.5% per year. But we were going through accelerated growth last year. We were out achieving what the norm group was, essentially. We've tapered that off. And I think the pandemic had something to do with us, instead of having 3% achievement, only having 1% achievement or flat achievement. So you'll notice the graph looks very similar as it does in mathematics. The dip gets a little bit more pronounced in reading than it does in mathematics at elementary. And once again, some of those foundational skills really become important. You'll notice that the purple line here shows where students scored the previous year, so the fall of 2018 and 2019. And you'll notice that the gap is pretty wide, especially in that second grade class and that first grade class, which are the two classes that we are the most concerned about. First and second grade in reading and third grade in math seem to be the areas where we saw the greatest need to close some gaps for students. So this chart shows the change in proficiency, and like I said, you'll notice that from first grade at the bottom all the way through 11th grade on the right and the district average at the far right, you'll see the two grade levels that we are the most concerned about was the dramatic loss that we had in first grade and second grade in reading. And we're fairly flat once we get to 4th, 5th, and 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Then we have this spike in 9th and 10th grade, which I think we will get some better data on when we finish the test. So like our math growth, the percentage of students meeting their growth targets slowed way down in early elementary. Less than 30% of our students met their growth targets last year in our primary grades, which is alarming. Because if you look at the previous year, you can see that we had this gap in our second grade, and that's very concerning to us. And then we have a leveling off, which we had seen in previous years, and the performance really needs to accelerate if we're going to continue to make solid gains in student achievement. So similar to the charts that I showed you in math, reading really is a mere reflection of mathematics in terms of subgroups. So this is the non-poverty versus poverty subgroup analysis. Same thing, gold bar represents the 2018-19% average RIT score. The blue bar represents the 2019-20 average RIT score. And you can see that in general, the blue bar is shorter than the yellow bar, which means that we saw some reduction, some retraction in average RIT score. But you'll notice that the dots are not significantly lower than the bar itself, which says that we did not see a huge impact for students in poverty from the pandemic. EL is a similar story. Once again, once you get into high schools, we're dealing with fairly small numbers of students. But once again, the gap between the students who are EL and students who are not EL did not change significantly from 2018-19 to 2019-20. We did not see big gaps increase. And then lastly, in reading, in our special education students, similar story. While there may have been some decreases in the non-IEP group, you'll see that the gap between the IEP and the non-IEP group stayed pretty much consistent regardless of the grade level that was tested. So a few key observations. I know this is a lot of data to take in a very short amount of time. But really, in a general sense, the COVID-19 closure, it had an impact on student achievement, but it certainly was not to the extent which we feared it might be. And I think to the extent that many people in the media maybe portrayed that it would be. Clearly, elementary achievement was impacted at a greater level than middle school and high school. When we look at our individual subgroups, our most vulnerable students, we did not see significantly or disproportionately impacted effects. They were pretty consistent with what we had previously experienced in the fall of 2018-19. And most people ask, well, how did you do it? How is that able to happen? And quite honestly, our best guess is we just have darn good teachers, number one. And number two, we were on a tear. If you remember back to the fall of 2018 or 2019, the winter of 2020, we had seen really steady student achievement each of those testing periods. We believe that our really strong curriculum and pre-COVID instruction that occurred kind of built up some additional skills in kids. And what we did during the closure, while it could not replicate what was happening in our school buildings, we sent kids home with quality materials. Whether they took advantage of them or not, that certainly was voluntary at the time, but we wanted to make sure they had things in their possession that they could continue learning. And I think the data tonight show that many of our students took advantage of that opportunity during closure, or even took advantage of our summer learning program, which continued to build those skills so they wouldn't fall further behind. So where does this lead us next? First and foremost, we still know that our face-to-face instruction is the best thing that we can give kids. Our early elementary kiddos and our most vulnerable students absolutely need as much time with a teacher as they can get, especially in those early grades. We have to focus on going after grade level curriculum. We do not need to back up the truck and review everything that happened in the 3 months of closure. We have to be strategic about which things are prerequisite skills that we need to make sure students have access to. But all in all, we have to prioritize the individual needs of students using small group instruction, differentiated skill groups, progress monitoring the work that they're doing, and then intervening when necessary. Not for all students, but for those students who specifically need it. And lastly, we have to continue to work toward getting 90+% completion in our high schools so that we have an accurate picture of the great work that they're doing every day in our high schools, because we want to be able to celebrate that student achievement as well. And with that, I would pause and answer any questions that you might have tonight.
Questions from the board members?
So the sky's not falling, and that's good news. But I am concerned about those early elementary grades, just knowing how strongly their achievement in those grades predicts, their future success. So I don't know if that should keep me up at night, but I'm wondering, what's going to keep you up from this data, and what maybe can we do about those early elementary grades that might be more targeted?
Well, I'm going to go back to the next steps. Obviously, the most important thing we can do is make sure that our students and our staff are safe. And I think Dr. Murillo has put that at the front of our agenda every time we meet, is making sure that we do that. At the same time, we know that our kids benefit most when they have face-to-face instruction. It's how our teachers were trained. It's how our interventions were developed and tested. Having those kids in our presence, especially those kids who are most vulnerable, which at this point would be our early elementary kids, our students who need reading intervention, our students who need special education services, our students who are learning to speak English for the first time, they need to be with us. That's my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, fair enough. I think we all agreed that that's the best way to learn, and hopefully we can get there soon. But in the meantime, it's just really continuing to focus on doing what we can do right now the best way that we can.
Yeah, and Mr. LaFerla, I think it also, what Dr. Vorthman talked about in teaching the curriculum and not spending so much time reviewing.
Right.
But really being able to identify where small group and then class-wide intervention. And I also want to make sure that we caught what Dr. Vorthman said about we are maintaining kind of right there flatlining on where we are in our average, high average areas, but we did not see growth. And that's the greatest concern I
Right.
have, because our students should have been still growing. And because of releasing and closing schools, we maintained, but we certainly did not grow as our students should have. Yeah.
Yep.
I don't think you guys should be so hard on yourself. Nobody in the world ever imagined something like this would happen. You didn't drop significantly, so I'm certainly pleased with the numbers that I saw. I don't think any parent could ever expect. Don't be too hard on yourself.
Just one thing, I assume that we have all the resources necessary to provide that individualized helps those kids' needs, wherever it exists within their learning.
It is going to, I'll be honest with you, it's going to be a heavy lift, especially at our primary grades, in the hybrid model and for kids who are in virtual academy, especially if they need significant help. We have a limited number of people who can provide pull-out intervention. We have a limited number of extra support staff to allocate to that. And we're going to have to be very strategic about how we identify kids who need additional supports and how we schedule that additional support during the school day. We anticipated that we would have some loss. And so when Mr. Schultz and I looked at recreating the elementary instructional schedule, we carved out some time specifically from at the early grades from their content learning time to make sure that we were able to intervene. So it's a small amount of time. It's an extra 20 minutes a day through the first part of the school year. It may or may not be enough at this point. But what we want to do is individualize that, not paint with broad brushstrokes, but intervene with the students who need it the most, and keep pushing forward and implementing that curriculum and those resources that we have with Fidelity, because we know they were working. They were showing us the academic achievement that this board has been asking for years, and we were showing that we were making progress. And then this uncertainty happened to us. So now we have to get back, we've got to get back on track, because those kids only get one first grade. They only get one ninth grade year. And then we've got to make sure that they get everything they need in those years so that they can be successful as they move forward.
I'm assuming a lot of our technology tools can readily identify those gaps, reinforce the ones we're seeing, I'm assuming.
So the MAP test does a great job of giving us a general idea of where we need to be focusing on with individual students. And those students that we need additional information for, we have diagnostic screeners that can help us pinpoint exactly where in mathematics, through our program with Bridges, or some of the diagnostic assessments we have in Wonders in elementary. I would be remiss if I didn't say that at secondary, I do believe some of our math increases are attributed to the work that Ann Nedved and her team have done on really redefining how we're going to implement mathematics at the secondary level. We adopted some new resources. They're more engaging for students, more relevancy. We worked with UNO and MOEC to really put some professional development in place. We adopted a program that's nationally recognized as kind of the gold standard in illustrative math. And I think that could have some impact on the work, as well as the school improvement plans that our building principals put together with their teachers, really focusing on the work that needs to be done to raise student achievement.
Some of your bars at the very beginning of the presentation, there was a dip between second and third grade. And that was in 18, 19, and then this time too. Is that a curriculum structure that needs, what do you foresee with that?
It's partly attributed to the MAP test.
Okay.
So as you remember, there are two batteries of assessment. One is a K2 assessment, and in that, especially in reading and math, kids have the headphones on, and they're basically read the test to them, and then they respond. Once they get into second, third, and we switch in second grade so that we can see kind of what is it really going to mean when they get to third grade, but they are all independent.
I didn't remember there was something specific about it.
So NWA did adjust some of the norms this year to try to account for some of that transitional dip that we see between those two testing instruments. And we'll see if that ferrets out throughout the school year.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Surely somebody's going to ask Dr. Shudak a really hard question about effect size or something.
What
is this really
the
statistically
square root
significant?
of 0.08?
Because he figured effect sizes for every single grade level, for every single subgroup, for every single building, for every single grade level.
That was not
I'm
what
gonna
I
have
was
to
going to
Google.
ask.
Thank you, Dr. Schumann.
Yeah. But I guess just on the high school level, where are we at right now that gain seems to be so different, and when do you expect us to get to that 90% test completion? Or do we have any idea yet?
Yeah, so we have another week of testing. We're allowing this week to kind of get the last tests in. We have some ground to make up at both of our high schools. And I met with Mrs. Smith today and the two high school principals, and I think that they both have a good plan to try to get some additional tests done this week.
And our next MAP assessment is in
January.
January, right? So while we didn't lose a lot of ground, what numbers are we looking forward for you to get back to that happy path, happy place?
Well, one of the challenges that we are now faced is we're behind. So we need to see accelerated growth. I will be very tickled if we get back to kids meeting their individual growth targets. And that's that item number 2 on goal number 1 is getting 60% of our kids hitting that individual growth target and 100% of our kids showing some growth. I can live with the proficiency taking us a little bit of time to get back to 80% or get up to 80%, but we have to have kids growing every single testing period.
Dr. Worthman, explain that growth target and why that's so important, so those watching
Sure.
will understand.
So every time a student takes the MAP assessment, it recalibrates them and gives them an individualized score based on how they performed on that assessment. So if you scored a RIT score of 187 in math, it's going to say, based on students who are like you and who've taken this test in the past, we would expect you to score at a 191 on the next assessment if you're making adequate growth. And so that's how we determine whether or not we're hitting that 60% of our kids meeting their growth target. It's based on how many of the kids actually hit that target that NWEA said that kids like them should hit in order to continue growing year after year. So that's the target that I'm kind of focused on the most, is growth.
Did all the kids take the MAP assessment for elementary on-site, or did some do hybrid versus, I would be interested if some were online versus on-site, what those
We made that
differences would be?
decision very early on, that the only kids that we allowed to test remotely and not in our presence were kids who are open enrolled to us from a district that is further than 30 miles away. And that number is less than 20, I believe. Is that correct, Marty? It's a very small number, very small number. Otherwise, all students were required to come on site, either in their classroom, in their school building at an alternate time, or Marty ran 2 weeks of testing here at ESC all day long and all evening long so that people could come in, because we want valid results. We want to say with confidence to our teachers and to our parents and to our community, this is where our student achievement is, and this is where we need to go in order to increase it. And there are a lot of school districts who are doing remote testing with NWEA, and it wasn't something that we felt comfortable with.
And then for like the growth goals and stuff like that, if there was a dip for students or anything like that, does it recalibrate that, or does it still have that expectation where it's then saying that they need to increase like 9 between this test and the next?
It recalibrates at every testing session. So it's going to set them a new goal that's attainable. And that's why I say now we have to accelerate. Because if you didn't meet your goal and you actually slid back, you've got to not only make up the ground that for the goal that you already had set, you really need to keep moving. And that's the difficult part of any type of setback, and why it's so disappointing from the increases that we saw, is because now we have to make even more ground up that we'd already covered.
How many,
It's purely based on where other students like you scored. NWEA doesn't know if you are an English learner or if you are a student with an IEP, or they assume that they take you from where you are and set a goal from where you need to go.
Okay.
So remember, we test all of our kids, all of them taking a grade level assessment, a computer adapted assessment. We don't exempt anybody from the data that you see up here.
Just a raw score. And the graphic data is what
We pull that so we can see do we have problems? Do we have patterns? Do we have things that we need to address? Do we have an equity that we need, that's in our system that we need to figure out? And right now, what we're seeing is in those three subgroups specifically, we're not seeing students disproportionately impacted than students who are not in those subgroups.
Was there any subgroup then that we saw that there was disproportionate from last year to this year?
Not in general. Some of them lined up in individual grade levels, but they matched the grade levels of their non-subgroup peers. So, and Marty ran an effect size for every single one of them and triangulated it with other data points to make sure that we were 100% certain.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Worthman.
Thank you very much.
And that completes our report.
Okay. We move forward into the resolution section of our meeting. Before us first is the approval of the budget guarantee. Do I have a resolution?
And I can move the Board of Directors of the Council Bluffs Community School District approve the 1% budget guarantee request, and that we may levy property tax for fiscal year 2021-2022 for the regular program budget adjustment as allowed under Section 257.14 Code of Iowa.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
So this just basically gives us that guarantee of 1% growth, regardless of what the budget changes might be from the state.
Or enrollment, yeah.
Based on, okay, yeah.
There's no further discussion. We have a resolution to approve the budget guarantee. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll? Thank you.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Minchell,
Yes.
Ms. Shuda,
Yes.
Mr. Furlow,
Yes.
Mr. Tyler.
Yes. Before us now is the approval for the Request School Budget Review Committee, approval of special education deficit.
I'll move that we request allowable growth and supplemental aid payment for the special education deficit of $1,523,937.24 in the 2019-2020 school year.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Were we able to get this sent into the state then? I know, was this the one that the system had crashed and we weren't able to send in? Right. So we're, okay, so we're good.
Yes.
If there's no further discussion, before us now is a resolution to approve the Request School Budget Review Committee, approval of special education deficit funding. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Ms. Shuda,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Minchell,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Yes. And the motion has been approved. Before us now is a resolution requesting spending authority for excess EL costs.
I can move the district request from the School Budget Review Committee, MSA of $330,831.55 for excess ELL costs for the 2019-2020 school year.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, before us we have a resolution requesting spending authority for excess English learner cost. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Ms. Shuda,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Minchell,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Tyler.
Yes. And the motion has been approved. For us now, we have some equipment at the Wilson Middle School.
I can move that we approve the winning bid from Cisco Lincoln in the amount of $133,746 for the kitchen equipment at Wilson Middle School.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
I feel like this was the bid that we saw a couple months ago, month and a half ago, 2 months ago. I'm trying to think. I thought we saw equipment, or we saw at least specs of the
We might have showed what we were bidding
the
out.
pieces we were bidding.
Yeah. Lisa, you want to
And
speak to that?
3 separate bids for the 3 different projects, all within the middle school renovations. They've all been bid within the last year, so it's very possible that we're thinking of one other one because we first had Madison campus, and that was a much smaller one. And then we did Kern just, I believe, it was last October or November. But they're nearly identical, so the products were.
There's no further discussion. Before us now is a resolution to approve the Wilson Middle School kitchen equipment bid. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Sheehan?
Yes.
Mr. Renshaw?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. Before us now is an approval of the Council Bluffs Community School District Access Control System Phase 2 for the Thomas Jefferson High School and Wilson Middle School projects. Do we have a motion?
I'll move the board award bid number 20-011 for the Council Bluffs Community School District Access Control System Phase 2, Thomas Jefferson High School and Wilson Middle School project to Commonwealth Electric Company, who is the low base bid in the amount of $192,700.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Is the portion for Wilson, is this the new electrical that needs to come in, or was this dollar amount already included in the renovation?
This is part of the renovation, but we did bid it with TJ to drive the cost down. This is a follow-up to the first round that we did to TJ where we tried to get, because of the 2 disconnected buildings, and we had those fobs and they didn't quite work well. So that is Wilson and the renovations that we're doing currently at Wilson, plus adding TJ to the project.
And does this bid then align with what we had, is it more, or
Budgeted?
le- yeah?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Maybe I've missed this, the role that Engineering Technologies Inc. plays in this.
John has been a part of the bid process with Daryl Myers. John, I don't know if you want to talk about when you guys received the bids last week and you came over to open those up. But technology has really been driving this for me. Mr. Pringer had this, and then now John has this.
Absolutely. There is a very large need, especially at Thomas Jefferson. There's a lot of events there, and the door access system that we tried there just does not allow for any of that. And so we'd like to align this. It's going to be with the S2 security system that we purchased for the Madison campus and also Kern. So this would be a continuation of that. You got it.
A goal of the district would be able to look at, could we do this district-wide? Could we provide this? This really allows teachers access without propping doors open, being able to leave and come back in. It also gives us a sense of who's in the building, who comes in the building, who leaves the building. It provides for us that ability to also completely lock everything down. And if there was an emergency in a building and we went to the building, we'd be able to have quick access to get in the building with the cards. So it's a really positive piece that Mr. Myers has been and works and supports John on this effort, looking at how do we get key access into all of those buildings. And so it is something that, after we finish the 2 middle schools in Thomas Jefferson, looking at maybe devising a plan that could maybe get AL in there, and then continue to look at our elementary sites and plan maybe over the next 3 years, 2 to 3 years, how could we get all of the buildings set up on this same area?
And ETI, what's their role in this?
They help design the system for us.
Okay. So this is just the cost of the actual equipment itself, or? is there
The
extra cost?
hardware and also the equipment installed.
And then there's their cost on top of this for the design pieces? I'm just curious.
The what?
For Engineering Technologies Inc., who wrote the letter, what is their part in this?
Because of the design, they'll get part of that as well.
Okay.
really what this comes down to, if you go over to Madison or you go over to Kern and you have that really secured foyer and then
Yeah.
also office, this allows for this to be implemented at Wilson and Thomas Jefferson.
I was just more confused with who they were. I
Gotcha.
can understand this, but I just don't understand their role in this.
It's an extremely complicated system, and we don't have anybody in-house that could do that.
Okay. So they're putting it together. Is there additional fees for them on top, or is this part of encompassing their kind of bidding process? I'm just curious on payment to ETI, that's a separate thing,
Part
or
of this bid,
is that
isn't
part
it?
of the whole bid?
It's part of because they built that.
Okay, okay.
I know in reviewing warrants, keys, replacing keys, oh my gosh, 7 years. How much it costs to replace a lock and a key. That was one of the first stories I heard. It was about the key. Ridiculous.
In future projects, is save funds allowable for funding those things?
What we've done, kind of like with the parking lot, how we divided it up, it's kind of
Mhm.
what we did before to set up buildings. and maybe just, you know,
Hearing no additional conversation, we'll move forward with the resolution to approve the Council Bluffs Community School District Access Control System Phase 2 for Thomas Jefferson High School and Wilson Middle School project. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Mensah?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
Dr. Ogden?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Tupel?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. For us now is our consent agenda. Those items include the 2021-20 evaluation and testing plan, the 2021 Chamber of Commerce membership, the 2021 committee appointments, an agreement with the Heartland Family Services, agreement with Recovery Health of Iowa Incorporated, with the an agreement with Woodward Granger School District, and the Grant Wood Consortium 2021. We have approval of our special education contracts for students placed outside of the district. Those include One Oak, Goodwill Industries, Sioux City Community School District, Boys and Girls Residential Treatment Center, the Alpha School, Heartland School of Omaha, Daybreak. Those are the special education placements. We have personnel actions, claims and accounts. We have a resolution to approve our consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda as.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we have approval of the consent agendas before us. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Ogden?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
Mr. Mensah?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Zani?
Yes, and the resolution is passed. We do have a advertised closed session tonight. Do we have a motion from the body?
Yeah, be resolved that a closed session as provided in section 21.5, parent 1, parent I of the Open Meetings Law be conducted to evaluate the professional competency of an individual whose performance is being considered to prevent needless and irreparable injury to that individual's reputation, and that individual has requested a closed session.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, before us we have a resolution to go into closed session. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
Dr. Ogden?
Yes.
Mr. Mensah?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
And Mr. Hudak?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. We will be conducting the closed session in this room, so I will need to ask all those who are not involved with this to vacate the space. Thank you for your help tonight. Appreciate it.